I decided to write a novel named and entitled The Sameness Life of Nandi. The setting is taking place in 2014. Nandi is a middle-aged African-American woman that is married, but she's suffering at the grips of her addiction. It's taking a toll on her and in everything she loves in every single aspect of her life. I decided to write this book specifically because it was near and dear to me. I chose the title Sameness because sameness references the relatability of human beings. Sameness references the struggles that we go through as human beings. I just find it unfortunate sometimes in life that we come to a point where we minimize certain things. If one's addicted to coffee is lesser severe than the one that is addicted to alcohol. Yes, they sound like two extremes, but we're basing that off the substance and the item itself. But at the end of the day, an addiction is an addiction is an addiction. An addiction is a behavior that takes over your life and takes precedence and totally consumes you and dominates you, and you make that priority at all costs. That's what addiction is. So I decided to entitle it Sameness for the relatability portion, and I decided to choose an African-American woman, middle-aged African-American woman, just because of my culture and my background and where I come from, because growing up, we never talked about addiction. That was not addressed. It's not a thing you discuss on the tables at dinner time or at family reunions. It's just not a point of conversation. As addictions are not a point of conversation, so is abuse. That's not a point of conversation. We just don't sit at the at the dinner table, and just have a free dialogue about that. And I feel that fact that because we don't talk about it as a culture, and though I was born and raised in Zimbabwe, I say black is black everywhere where you go. Our tendencies are similar because even migrating to the Western country, I do have friends from the Western country that are black, and our tendencies are the same. Who they have time and time told me they don't talk about issues like that as well. And with this, I'm not necessarily insinuating that addiction happens in minority homes only. I'm just going for the punch that it happens across every culture. But it's time that the black community, the black culture started talking about it. So I grew up in this culture where we didn't talk about it. I used to see uncles and aunts during little birthday parties or Christmas gatherings or whatever. You see people passed out and you kind of see people drinking, and you just, in my mind at that time, I just thought, oh, they're having a good time. I had no conscious knowledge of what that behavior was. And because there's no conscious knowledge of what that behavior is, I fell into that behavior later on in life. And when I fell into that behavior, it didn't have the label. I didn't know. And so I was in darkness, and that was the most frightening 9 years of my life, but I did not know. And I press for the black community and the black culture to talk about addictions. Let's talk about addictions. Let's talk about abuse. Let's talk about conversations that are very uncomfortable to us. So my heart led me to writing this book, and not necessarily to poke and point the finger at a culture, but just to say everyday life happens, struggles happen, but how do we address them from this point forward? So hence, that's why there's an African American character who's suffering from the addiction. I highlight that because addiction is serious. I decided to write it based on a character named Nandi. Nandi is part of my African heritage. I wanted a name that's very distinctive so it won't take away from the total message of the book. In this book, Nandi is not only facing this journey alone, but she discovers a lot about herself. And like with any other behavior, to understand why adults are at the end of this behavior, you also have to go back and see where and how and what happened in childhood. So she takes a journey within this book with her best friend to discover a lot of things that she didn't understand. It's a very emotional, raw book. It challenged me on so many levels. I didn't think I was going to be able to complete the book. I wanted to write the book in the mind of Nandi and solely in her mind, so that readers could have an understanding. It's easier for people to look at addicts and point out addicts as they're made in Hollywood. Oh, that looks like a crackhead, or that looks like, look at him, but that's not how addicts look. Addicts come in all forms, shapes, and sizes. So I also highlight a lot of different personalities in this book that are revelation to what addiction can possibly look like. I was drawn to this book. My heart was drawn to this book because the point that I wanted to make was that addiction is cross-culturally. Addiction is found cross-culturally. I wanted to highlight that it's time that we stopped being silent, and it's time that as a Black community, we start talking about the issues, the human struggle issues. I wanted to write this book to show a side of addiction that most people don't want to talk about. It was hard because writing it from the addict's mind brought a lot of memories back. It challenged me to go into places that I had since left. And so I had to open up on so many levels, because if it's not authentic, I don't write. If it's not from my heart, I don't write. I dismissed the project a couple of times because I questioned my own strength, because the journey was very emotional. And then when her best friend got involved in the whole thing, it became super emotional. And I did not know if I could go there. And some of that came once again from questioning, like, oh my gosh, I don't want to put this down because. But I'm like, okay, am I writing for myself, or am I writing a journey that is true, that is common, that is out there? And I said, yes, that's what I'm writing. I had to put myself in check a couple of times. I was glad that the manuscript was completed. Finally. It took a lot of strength, but it created an entire wholeness within my life. My desire for the reader at the end of the day is those that have been affected by addiction and those that have had a biased opinion of addiction can actually understand that such struggles can happen to anyone.